afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 7th of April 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Nick Green, and we'll be joined by Skype link by Jon Shackleton. So we'll just check whether you're there. Are you with us, Jon?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, and thank you for agreeing to come on. Otherwise, it's a lonely job this week in the UK Column News studio. Well, beautiful weather in Plymouth at least over the weekend and bank holiday Monday. Lots of blue sky and sunshine, and I think a little bit warmer than some places in the south of France, but we won't spend too much time on that. And we're getting some good reports from across the country. It's even sunny in the Rhondda Mountain and from southeast London, so some pretty good cheerful reports. Well, if the weather's good, the situation in the country under the Lib Lab Con continues to deteriorate. We should remember, of course, that we have no government in position at the moment, so things will carry on more or less as normal. And what's the big subject? Well, fraud and corruption in the banks, and the Mail here leading with a big headline on HSBC and other banks. What have they got to say? Well, they're saying that cost of the scandals at the banks hits 39 billion. 61% of profits in the past 3 years have gone on remediation costs, with bill driven by PPI compensation. Britain's banks set aside 4.7 billion last year in PPI compensation. Another 2.3 was earmarked for fines for rigging foreign markets. So we've got Barclays mentioned, Royal Bank of Scotland and HSBC, so they're all in the mix. Well, what's George Osborne having to say? Well, he's embedded in a little video on the Mail, and he's saying that he is going to take tough action to clean up the banks. He says there is corruption in the city, but it's only a few. Serious Fraud Office are doing their stuff, and they're conducting a criminal investigation, to which I'm just going to say the same old political spin and lies to let criminal bankers go free. We're going to encourage you to vote Conservative 2015 if you like more fraud and corruption. But let's come back to that headline by the Mail, because note the language. Corruption has become a scandal. When it's a criminal act inside an international bank, it's a scandal as far as the mainstream press are concerned. And well, you don't get clobbered with proper fines. This is all to do with remediation and PPI compensation. Jon, you're legally trained in contracts. What do you make of all this?
It's a bit more than a scandal, isn't it? I mean, this is what I see as money laundering. And the frightening thing is, people, well, many MPs have been involved with the HSBC and they're on their payroll, and that's been historically a fact and is a fact at the moment. In terms of the serious fraud investigation unit, now I contacted them about an HSBC situation quite a while ago because, as you know, I'm dealing with a few property issues for people, and they've been securitized their mortgages and they've been selling these bonds on the market. Again, it's completely corrupt and it's money laundering.
Well, money laundering seems to be the right description to me. But of course, we've seen this time and time again. The moment the banks do something, it's rigging of interest rates. Well, OK, what we're talking about is fraud and corruption, but it's labelled rigging. And therefore, you can smooth it over and say, well, we're going to produce a regulatory body that will sort all this out sometime in the future. I thought I'd just add this slide, if we can pop this one up. We've shown this before, but obviously we're now seeing this in context. It was the Independent reporting that 1 in 5 of the businessmen who signed pro-Tory letters were given honours by David Cameron, and a third are Tory donors. So he doled out 18 MBEs, OBEs, CBEs and knighthoods to signatories of the letter over the last Parliament. And this has got to be more corruption, insider dealing, and indeed misconduct in public office. There's no way they can really escape this is there, John? These people are either involved in criminal activity or they're covering up for criminal activity on a massive scale.
Well, the scary thing, Brian, is that as we speak, they're trying to change the Ministry of Justice and the systems within the courts. Now they're trying to digitalise everything, and I've been looking at this in detail this morning, and it's very, very frightening that they're not going to use the correct paperwork and the guidelines that CPS, Crown Prosecution Services, have stated. They're going to ignore all that, and they're changing their system again. Again, this morning, I tried to deal with a court situation and get a case management file. And we've talked about this on the programme quite a number of times. And the courts are still refusing to give court management files. In fact, on the front desk, one of the women said, "I've never heard of a court management file." It's gone completely bonkers in the court system. There's no justice there. So the politicians, from my point of view, I strongly believe that the politicians have done this on purpose so that they can hide real crime.
Well, John, I've got to agree with that one. As I pointed out last week, when I gave the warning about the potential for violence on the streets in Rotherham, there have been many people over a great many years warning that actually the spread of fraud and corruption, the breakdown of our institutions has been driven from the inside of Fifth Column, at work in the very institutions that we believe are there to protect us. We'll carry on working on that. Well, of course, one institution that more and more people realise cannot be trusted is, of course, the BBC. And the Mail here pointing out an incredible story that the BBC has spent thousands of pounds of licence fee payers' money on a guide to teaching its staff how to use smileys. As the article said, you could almost think this was an April Fool's joke, but no, it's not. BBC spokesman, anonymous of course, attempted to justify this waste of public money by saying we carry out research to help give our audiences what they want, and it's right that we do it. So the BBC once again justifying its own actions. I've got a little bit more to do on the BBC in a second, but it's once again in our faces. The BBC swallowing up £3.65 billion worth of public money, huge salaries, pensions, and they say what the public want apparently are more smileys. Would you agree with that, John?
I think the public are sick of the propaganda from the BBC. They don't pay their TV licence. They don't want to contribute toward the criminal activities that are going on within the BBC. And I spoke to one of the reporters of RT TV just last week, and I'd like to do an internal, well, not an internal because they won't let me in their doors, but I'd like to do an investigation with yourself as well, Brian, in investigating the BBC and what they are really up to. What is their agenda?
Well, we would love to do that. Of course, UK Column did research on the BBC probably about a year ago now, in which we discovered extraordinary things hidden in plain sight. But of course, we could find this on the BBC website and in their accounts, etc. I do mention this a little bit later in the programme, some very disturbing facts about the BBC being involved in what to us appeared to be subversion amongst their many other attributes. Well, let's have a look at this little story and then we'll come back on the BBC. This is the Western Morning News with a big pro-Navy story, which is fine. They're saying that RFA Argus, the military hospital ship, which has been spearheading the UK's fight against the Ebola virus in Africa, is back in West Country waters as the crew begin to fly ashore. And it then goes on to say that Defence Secretary Michael Fallon last month awarded RFA Argus an Admiralty Board letter of commendation in recognition of her contribution to the fight against Ebola in the African country. And, presumably to make it look really good, the award is also for deployments spanning all the way back to 1982. Well, accepting all this and the fact that the captain and crew would have been very dedicated in what they did, we would just like to ask a simple question. What did this ship actually achieve? Does anybody know? Do we know what the total cost of the mission was? We know helicopters flew vaccines apparently into Central Africa. What did that do? How is it that a few helicopters could have possibly changed the agenda of a supposed virus which was in danger of overrunning the whole of Africa? The more I look into this story, the less I understand it. But let's move on to this, which gets even better, from the BBC, and perhaps that will give us a clue into the RFA Argus article itself. So we've got BBC scaremongering, and this is the article we're referring to. Antibiotic resistance, 80,000 might die in future outbreak. So we were very interested with the BBC language. It said that people might die. It said they could die. It says if there was a widespread outbreak, high numbers of deaths could be expected, and we could make much more of it could make much more of modern medicine unsafe. Well, where's all of this come from? Well, of course, it comes out of Tory Central Office. Prime Minister David Cameron getting on this, and he's previously warning that the world could be cast back into the dark ages of medicine unless action is taken to tackle the threat of resistance to antibiotics. Well, where's it come from really? Well, bring in the Cabinet Office, and this is the document that also rates other threats to UK, including terrorist threats. So everything is in there now, from medicine to terrorists. And let's identify the document itself. A bit more to add to that one, Nick, if we can just hold it there briefly. Here we go. This is the main document itself, the National Risk Register of Civil Emergencies, straight out of the Cabinet Office. And we would just like to say, remember that also the Cabinet Office has been pushing the Behavioural Insights team. Here's the document where they're boasting that after 3.5 years in number 10 in the Cabinet Office, the Behavioural Insights team is being spun out of government and being set up as a social purpose company. What are this team of people doing? Well, they're working on our minds in order to get us to accept government policy. So we just wonder whether the spin coming out of the Cabinet Office on the might be's, the coulds, the huge number of deaths, is this spin out of the Behavioural Insights team. Incredible. I know you'd seen this article, John. What do you think about this? Is it real, or is this scaremongering?
It's partially scaremongering. Well, not partially, quite seriously scaremongering. But you've also got to remember that you've got a lot of, in people's diets, the people that eat meat, etc. Now, a lot of these cattle are injected by antibiotics. And then look at our water supply, and if you check on that as well, you'll find antibiotics in there. So we're ingesting antibiotics on a day-to-day basis. So partly that is quite right. It's not as effective as it was. But to suggest it's like a massive plague is going to hit the UK any time is scaring people, and I think scaring people so that they can be controlled.
Well, that's an interesting word you've used there, control, because of course that is exactly what the Behavioural Insights team has been doing so successfully. They've sold the applied behavioural technology to both America and Australia. But of course, even our politicians simply don't understand the danger. And I'd like to thank one of our viewers for sending in this letter, which he received from his MP, Douglas Carswell, now, of course, a UKIP MP. And this man just simply doesn't seem to grasp the danger of the government's Behavioural Insights team. Let's have a look at his letter. Here it is, dated the 19th of March 2015. We'll just blow it up a bit. He says, Dear Michael, thank you very much indeed for your letter. I had not heard about neuro-linguistic programming, but I'll certainly look into it. I am aware of the Cabinet Office Behavioural Insight team. I find the team, or the so-called nudge unit, rather patronising. I'm not sure if it's quite as sinister as you make out, but I do think there's something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable about their approach. Apart from anything, it's traditional patrician politics dressed up in contemporary psycho-babble garb. I think we should shut down the Behavioural Insight Unit, and the government should stop trying to patronise people and get them to do what the government wants. Now, this is a very interesting letter because to me it shows several things. It shows that Mr. Carswell simply doesn't understand what the Behavioural Insights team is doing. It doesn't understand the power of that unit and the amount of money, public money, it's already swallowed up. And he thinks that applied behavioural technology, which is working so well, the government is selling it overseas. He thinks it's a little bit of psychobabble. So I'm going to say gross ignorance here from Mr. Carswell, because this, in my opinion, at least anyway, is the technology which is now not only destroying government departments, but of course it's actively working to change the way we think. That BBC article on antibiotics or Ebola seems to fit with it. Any comments from you on that one, John, and then we'll move on with some of the other bits of the news.
I'd just say that you can clearly see that none of these people are independent in terms of the BBC, Parliament, different MPs, i.e. UKIP, Conservative, Labour, etc., the court system, the health system, there's nothing independent anymore. They're all working together for one agenda. They're all trying to manipulate what is true and what is false. I think people are waking up, but we need them to wake up pretty fast.
Yeah, indeed, because this thing is spreading increasingly quickly. And we'll remind people that the Behavioural Insight team, of course, when it first got going with big help from DEFRA, actually went out to apply the behavioural psychology to government departments before they were allowed to use it on the general public. So if you've been dealing with government departments and have found that you've been treated in a rather odd way, or you couldn't get common sense out of them, we're going to suggest part of that is due to the fact that these people have themselves been trained by the Applied Behavioural Psychology Unit. Well, other countries are watching Britain and indeed America at the moment with great interest. We've had several reports from informed people saying that the Russians are having particular difficulty working out whether Britain is a stable democracy anymore, and if the country is unstable, how they deal with it in terms of foreign policy, for example. So it was quite interesting to pick up this article in the Daily Telegraph. And essentially, this is a story that's been spun to make it anti-Russian. It's about a British PhD student who's been expelled from Russia, being accused of being a spy, in inverted commas. So the young lady is from Nottingham University. She was apparently researching early 20th century history in Nizhny Novgorod in Russia. And she was thrown out because it was a technicality, but they said that Laura Sumner, the student, had infringed rules by travelling on a commercial visa when she was not engaged in business. Now, if we get into this a little bit deeper, it becomes quite interesting because here's the statement: she wasn't engaged in business. But in fact, the Russians went on to say that they were suspicious and unnerved by the fact that amongst the research going on was reference to uprisings in Georgia, Ukraine and Kazakhstan in the mid-2000s, perceived in Moscow as attempts by the US and West European states to exert control in Russia's backyard. And they're then referring to Professor Badcock. This is the young lady's mentor in Nottingham University. And the professor specialises in the late imperial period and the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Well, we're just going to remind people here that it's still only been the UK column that's been pointing out that the BBC, particularly through its charity Media Action, was boasting of its ability to help destabilise foreign states. And indeed, in Kazakhstan, it was also putting in applied behavioural psychology to change the whole basis of that country. So we've got a feeling that the Russians are not quite as silly as the Telegraph would make out here. And we thought we'd take you a bit deeper into this story by having a look at the professor herself. Well, here she is from the Department of History, University of Nottingham, Sarah Badcock. And what is she big in? Well, you can have a look at her research here. Siberia, a place of punishment in the last years of Tsarism. This one here, which caught our eye, co-editor of the journal Revolutionary Russia. And she's also co-editor of a book, Kaleidoscopes of Revolution, Russia in Regional Perspective, 1914 to 1921. So at first glance is a historian, but very, very interested in the mechanisms of revolution. And this must be a fairly delicate subject for the Russians. Now, what we find is this lady has received funding from this organisation, the Arts and Humanities Research Council. You can find it online. And when you do find it, you will find that this is one of 7 bodies linked into Research Councils UK. And at this point, the whole thing becomes extraordinary because Research Councils calmly tells us that each year they invest around $3 billion in research, covering the full spectrum of academic disciplines from the medical and biological sciences to astronomy, physics, chemistry, engineering, social sciences, economics, environmental sciences, and the arts and humanities. So at that point, we can probably understand while life in this country is rapidly improving, more jobs, better healthcare, better education, clearly the result of $3 billion being spent in research. So let's have a look at that in a famous UK column wiring diagram. And here we are. So the professor sits centre, Professor Sarah Badcock, and her student, Laura Sumner, who was thrown out of Russia. And this was the linkage, first of all, into the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I believe that organisation's got a budget of around about 98 million. And the parent organisation here, Research Councils UK, boasting of that 3 billion funding. Where did that come from? Well, of course, straight out of central government, the Department for Business Innovation and Skills. Remember, a government short of money. And the Research Council has a finger in every pie going. So we've got this list of the various organisations that they're going into. Everything from science and technology, engineering, medical, economic, social, and down at the bottom, natural environment science of the natural environment. So let's add in this gentleman, Professor Aaron Rettish. He's from Wayne University in the States, and he's co-author of this little pamphlet which comes out monthly, which is all about Russian imperialism, 1914 to 2014. So rather more here than meets the eye, a simple student doing a little bit of research, possibly. Do we think the Russians are right to be suspicious of this group? We certainly do. Had you heard of any of these before, John?
I've heard of some of the bodies that you're mentioning, yes, and several funding streams that go on within government. I don't know enough about this story, really. You've obviously done a lot more research than what I have. But it does look a little bit, let's call it dubious for now. But a government body putting funds into a academic organisation and then sending a student to a country that we're having a few little difficulties with. Well, kind of. I mean, I don't think Putin's got any agenda to come and create war or wage war at all, but this is what Cameron would like us to believe. So I think the Russians are partly They're not thick. They never have been thick. And I think they've looked at this and thought, hang on, the government are giving this person money. We don't want anything to do with this, and they've expelled them out of the country. I think maybe that is the case.
Yeah. Well, we'll follow it through a bit more, and I think we could also link it in with your suggestion, which is a deeper look at the BBC. Many people very interested. I thought I would just bring this up. We covered this the other day, but think of it now against the background of the research councils. This was when we were looking at the so-called independent think tank policy exchange. I'll go through this very quickly. We had a look at the board members. And what did we find? Well, we found links through to speechwriters for George W. Bush. We had Rothschild bankers. We had other bankers there, including consultancies to global corporations. And we have journalists, think tank businessmen who've been working with the government. So these are all the organisations working behind the backs of the British public. Have they got our best interests at heart? I don't think so. But there we go. Once we know where to look, some of this information seems to come to the surface quite quickly. Well, what's been happening aside from dirty dealings by these third sector organisations? Well, of course, we've got to come back to the murky world of child abuse. And last week we put out basically a warning that we were being told by professional people that they believed that government agents, to use their own word, were looking to incite violence on Britain's streets. We said that Rotherham was being indicated as one of the key targets, and that paedophiles would be used as part of the agenda for stirring up trouble. So we'd reminded people here that, of course, the BBC, one of many media organisations that would have the British public believe that all paedophiles are Asian. And we'd also indicated that the Oxford Mail had said there would be an EDL demonstration the weekend just gone. And so we put up some of the information both from the English Defence League's website and Oxford Unite Against Fascism. Now, we did point out that on the English Defence League site, it said no racism or violence will be tolerated. And the event did take place. And in fact, if you look on YouTube, there's some film of the rally. This is a couple of still shots. So a small number of people on the streets. I believe that everything went peacefully. But we were very interested by the sorts of things being said and, of course, the sentiments being expressed here. So in principle, this was a rally against paedophiles. And, of course, the big message is that non-Muslim girls were being abused and that the abusers were Muslim men. So another screenshot here, Muslim men, non-Muslim girls, rape, jihad. So this is pretty emotive stuff. Now, the first thing we're interested in, which I think we can just highlight, is right at the back of this shot. You can see that there's a massive Thames Valley police presence. This is the police force, of course, that's absolutely failed to get out there and catch the abusers in the first place, even though many of the public were telling the police what was going on. But none of the public, and indeed the speakers that we have heard from the YouTube clip itself, seem to have grasped that the public is being played. So let's remind ourselves of the people who are failing to get to grips with the paedophile issue at the moment, and certainly failing to get to grips with the paedophile rings at the highest level. So we've got our own Prime Minister, well, temporarily, and we're going to say, of course, David Cameron is white, he's not Asian. We've got a Home Secretary, Theresa May, also white. We've got Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, white. We've got the former Chief Constable from Thames Valley Police, Sarah Thornton, of course, also white. We've got the Nottingham Police Chief failing to investigate Beechwood House child abuse as just one, Chris Eyre, also white. And we've got Peter Fahey, Chief of Greater Manchester Police, who's been in the spotlight recently for the failings of Greater Manchester Police over bringing paedophiles to book. So this is just a small selection of the people who are failing to bring down the establishment and Westminster paedophile rings. And we say, why? Why are these people not bringing the high-level paedophile rings to book? Well, perhaps a clue is there in Oxford itself, because, of course, some of the young girls who were abused were talking about being taken to London, to train stations, where they were met by white men in pinstripe suits. So we're going to say it's very important that the people of this country at the moment take a deeper look into who is really controlling the paedophile rings, how big they are, and how high they go into the political establishment, because we say if there's violence on the street over this issue, in fact, the abusers go free. Over to you, John. Pretty emotional subject, but feel free.
It's a difficult one. It's one that I've talked about for quite a while. And I was very concerned over the weekend about a racial war. And this is what I believe the government are trying to create, a race war. They're telling us that we're racist. This country isn't as racist as the government would like us to think. You know, we've had multiculturalism centuries and centuries, you know, and governments are trying to divide us. Now, crimes against children is very, very serious. And if people are watching this and listening, if they want to do their own personal investigation, look at Dolphin Square, look at Elm House Bed and Breakfast, and look at the other stories that we reported. We've just not picked these out of the thin air. These are things that are happening on a day-to-day basis, and who are controlling this? Now, the government wants to incite a riot. I'm being very serious here. The government wants to incite a riot using people like EDL, Britain First, etc., against the Muslim community. The Muslim community don't like paedophiles. The British community as a whole don't like child abuse. And the CSA inquiry that has been just beyond a joke has been going on and on and on. And the Home Office have all the files and documentational evidence about all this abuse, and they've had for some time. Now, why are they not releasing this? This is the big question. And why are the police hiding the crime statistics and arresting people like Melanie Shaw and gagging her, as well as Robert Green, and he's being gagged as well. Ask yourself why this is happening.
Well, to me, it's very clear. You've mentioned Melanie Shaw, and we're obviously thinking along the same lines. People probably won't believe this, but this particular part of the programme not pre-planned. So let's bring up Melanie Shaw. Here she is. And I'm running this article again because a few people didn't pick up the significance of the torn-up letter. So Melanie Shaw sent UK Column a letter which she had previously torn up. And why had she torn the letter up? Because she was simply sick of no action by her local MP, Chris Leslie. I'm going to say, for the benefit of the wider article, yet another white MP. She was so tired and sick of the fact that he was not giving her any real help. Indeed, in this letter, he was referring her back to the solicitors in Nottingham, VHS Fletcher's, who Melanie has already sacked because she didn't trust them, and also they appeared to be passing off a junior member of staff as if they were a solicitor. And I think we can just highlight it in the letter here. It might be as well for you to let your solicitors know. So we know that in the courts at the moment, child abuse victims are getting a raw deal. I can tell our viewers and listeners today, we believe that Melanie Shaw has been in solitary confinement in prison since she's been back in there. And just outrageous that once again no effort, no movement by a politician in order to take up the case of a child abuse victim. So there he is. There's Chris Leslie in pink. on a Labour Party conference stage. He's very big at spouting at the conferences, but when it comes to actually doing something to help somebody who's been horribly abused, what does he do? As far as Melanie Shaw's concerned, nothing. And we can also add that, of course, Melanie reported that her own abuse and that of, we now know, up to 150 other children in Beechwood was at the hands of white abusers. So here we are, ITV, and what are they recirculating? Well, they're back promoting Asian paedophiles. I think these are the gentlemen who were picked up under Operation Bullfinch in Oxford. But let's remind ourselves this incredible picture of David Cameron and Mr. Heseltine standing next to a particularly vicious paedophile, Matthew Byrne, who also happened to be an advisory board member for Common Purpose. So he would have been recruiting other future leaders to come and join him as part of the secret political charity Common Purpose. And yet this man was a paedophile, later convicted, or shortly after this photograph was taken. So David Cameron appears to have no proper security around him. Tory parties simply don't know who they're mixing with. What's going on here? Well, if we follow the ITV news programme through, we've got, here he is, Peter Fahey from Manchester. Well, there's been a Muslim child sex grooming scandal. There's the word, Muslim child sex grooming scandal. But no police are going to be disciplined, even though this poor young lady who's hidden in the background says that basically when the young girls went to the police for help, on some occasions they were simply laughing at them and turning off the tape machines in the recording interviews to say, oh, come on, tell us the real truth. So this is sickening stuff, and the lie that the paedophile rings in this country are Asian run is being ably helped along by the police. And perhaps they've got it right in Scotland. This was pointed out to us by David Scott in the last couple of weeks, that north of the border, the single police chief in charge of Police Scotland, Sir Stephen House, has now become so unpopular that people are saying this man's got to stand down, as no chief constable can be a law unto himself. So perhaps the same thing needs to happen in UK. Can we rely on the Independent Police Complaints Commission? Most people don't think so. And of course, we've now got a new body to replace ACPO, headed by Sarah Thornton, the very same chief constable from Thames Valley who failed the youngsters in the Oxford abuse in the first place. John, I'm going to smile with a wry smile. I need a bit of help here to comment on this. I mean, it is outrageous what's going on in this country. And then we have British politicians standing on a world stage and lecturing President Putin on how to run his country.
I mean, controversial, but David Cameron's committed high treason. It's a fact. And then the police force, you know, and again, I'm going to say the UK Common Law, the British Constitutional Group, we are not against the police. We're against corruption. So let's just get that right, because people sometimes think, oh, with this or that. We just want justice for all, whether it's a paedophile case or anything. But the problem we've got now, and I keep saying this to people, the police force are now a corporation, i.e. IBM owning Cornwall, Devon, and now Dorset police force. Now, that they're driven toward profits, not policing. So we're finding now that the police have become really like security guards, haven't they? And when the Home Office tell them to do something, they jump to their tune. If they don't, they withdraw any financial gains for them. I mean, the police have got millions. They've got millions upon millions. I mean, you look at this new organisation that the police have set up with a private company. I can't remember the figures now, but we were going into the tens of millions, weren't we?
Yes.
So it's financially driven. All of it's financial. The court system's financially driven. And, well, we know what the banksters are up to, don't we? And they're all interlinked with each other.
Indeed. And child abuse, child trafficking, big money at the end of the day. So where the children are, there's always big sums of money. The Mail here bringing in yet more evidence of the abuse of children at the highest levels of the British establishment. And this is Richard Carr, who's come forward, had been living in Dallas, Texas, but he's been brave enough to now come back to Britain in order to talk about his abuse. I was trafficked by Westminster sex abuse ring, and he claims he was attacked in his children's home, a gay brothel, and luxury London flat. So this brings us back to Dolphin Square. And let's remind ourselves what this duplicitous semi-prime minister David Cameron, here he was talking about Operation Bullfinch, the Oxford abuse. More needs to be done to tackle child abuse. And it took Simon Danczuk MP to say, well, actually, the reality is that David Cameron's trying to dismiss the whole thing. It's everywhere you look, it's in your face that we have senior British politicians, 99% of them white, are trying to blame the Asians for the paedophile rings, while presumably they're protecting their white political colleagues. Well, we'll end on that particular note. I've just got one further. Just hold that one, Nick, a second. Here we are. I just wanted to bring this onto screen. We've been using Scotland as a model for what we think is going to unfold politically in England and Wales, Northern Ireland. And we've now got yet another site, reason.com, pointing out the worrying advance of Scotland into what they're calling a nanny state. But if you actually read the article, it says down here, it's a country that imprisons people for singing songs, instructs people to stop smoking in their own homes, and which dreams of making salad eating compulsory. Seriously, Scotland the Brave has become Scotland the Brave New World. So with the Scottish state now rapidly moving to make children the property of the state, the model in Scotland for combined politics, police and courts, no separation of the powers, and a brave new world is pretty worrying, we think. Last comment from you, John.
Well, if we don't re-establish our constitution and our common law, which is a very bedrock of our society, we are going to be in an awful lot of trouble. And that's it.
Yeah, well, that says it all. If you haven't visited the British Constitution site before, you might like to do that. Indeed, have a look at UK column as well. British Constitution is there. The documentation, the history, the precedent is all there. And of course, the government at the moment desperate to reset this to create a new so-called new constitution, very dangerous. And the other area of our constitution under attack is, of course, common law, which gives us protection both as individuals and within our families. So have a look at the British Constitution Group website. Have a look at videos from our most recent conference where speakers are talking about these issues. Can we do something about it? Yes. What do we need? Good people helping their neighbours in a peaceful and common sense way. We'll leave you to think about that. Hard hitting after the weekend break. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.